Have you ever video called someone on the other side of the world, like FaceTiming your cousin in Tokyo or Zooming with a friend in London? The video is clear, the audio is crisp, barely any lag. Everyone thinks it's satellites beaming signals through space. But here's what nobody tells you about what's actually making that call happen. There are literally hundreds of massive cables lying on the ocean floor right now. Cables thicker than your arm, carrying beams of light across entire oceans. And somehow, impossibly, that light travels thousands of miles through glass without dimming, without getting scrambled, without getting lost in the darkness of the deep sea. In the next 15 minutes, you're going to understand exactly how fiber optic cables pull off what seems like actual magic and why the internet you use every single day depends on technology that sounds like it shouldn't even be possible. Here's what's really happening when you're scrolling Instagram or watching Netflix. You think you're connecting to the cloud, whatever that means. You picture data floating wirelessly through the air, bouncing off cell towers and satellites. That's the story we tell ourselves, because wireless sounds advanced and futuristic. But think about it this way. When you stream Stranger Things from a server in Virginia to your couch in California, that data isn't floating through the air. It's traveling as pulses of light through a physical glass cable. Picture this scenario. You're in Los Angeles, and you're watching a YouTube video that's hosted on a server in Ireland. That video data, millions and millions of bits of information, has to cross the entire United States and then travel under the Atlantic Ocean. We're talking about 5,000 miles of ocean. Dark, cold, under crushing pressure. And somehow a beam of light is making that journey in milliseconds, carrying your video without losing a single frame. Everyone tells you that information travels on the internet wirelessly through the air. But that's not what actually happens. What really happens is that about 99% of international data travels through undersea cables. Not satellites, not wireless signals bouncing around the atmosphere, physical cables lying on the seafloor. Right now, there are over 400 undersea cables connecting continents. They carry about 95% of all intercontinental voice and data traffic. Every email to Europe, every video call to Australia, every TikTok from Japan. It's all flowing through cables at the bottom of the ocean. And this matters because everything you think about how the internet works is probably backwards. You picture the internet as this ethereal, wireless thing existing in the cloud. But the cloud is actually made of very physical infrastructure. Massive data centers consuming entire city blocks of electricity. And connecting those data centers, miles and miles of glass cables carrying light. The internet isn't floating. It's buried underground and lying on ocean floors. And understanding how these cables work changes everything about how you see the digital world. So let me show you something. There's this phenomenon I call the invisible infrastructure paradox. It's when the most critical technology in your life is also the technology you never think about. Your phone feels wireless and magical. But somewhere, buried under streets or resting on the ocean floor, there's a physical cable making that magic possible. And the engineering that makes these cables work is way more mind-blowing than any wireless technology. Think about what we're actually trying to do here. We need to send information across an ocean. That information needs to travel as light, because light is fast, 186,000 miles per second. But light normally spreads out in all directions like a flashlight beam. Shine a flashlight across a room and the light scatters everywhere. How do you keep light focused and traveling in one direction for thousands of miles? How do you keep it from escaping the cable and disappearing into the dark ocean? This matters because solving this problem required understanding something completely counterintuitive about how light behaves. And once you see how fiber optic cables work, you'll understand one of the most elegant tricks in all of physics. It's called total internal reflection. And it sounds technical, but it's actually beautifully simple once you get it. Here's how it works. Light travels at different speeds through different materials. In air, light moves at about 186,000 miles per second. In water, it slows down to about 140,000 miles per second. In glass, it's even slower, around 124,000 miles per second. Now, pay attention to this. When light tries to go from a slower material to a faster one at a certain angle, something weird happens. It can't escape, it bounces back inside. like a mirror, but without any mirror there. It's like when you're underwater in a swimming pool and you look up at the surface. If you look straight up, you can see through the water to the sky above. But if you look at a steep angle toward the edge of the pool, the surface acts like a mirror. You see your own reflection instead of seeing through. The water surface is reflecting light back at you. Same thing happens inside a fiber optic cable. Light traveling through the glass core hits the edge at a steep angle and bounces back inside, over and over and over, thousands of times per second, for thousands of miles. This is why fiber optic cables can send light across oceans without losing it. The light isn't escaping because physics literally won't let it. As long as the light hits the wall of the cable at the right angle, it bounces back in. It's trapped by the laws of physics, zigzagging down the cable at incredible speed. Engineers designed the cables so that the light always hits at that perfect angle. The cable becomes a highway for light that can't exit until it reaches its destination. But here's where it gets interesting. You might think a fiber optic cable is this massive, thick tube like a fire hose. But the actual core where the light travels, it's thinner than a human hair. About 9 micrometers across. That's about 1/10 the width of a single hair on your head. And through this impossibly thin strand of glass, we're sending terabits of data per second. That's thousands of HD movies worth of information flowing through something you can barely see. Now, this next pattern is particularly sneaky because it involves something nobody tells you about ocean cables. There's this challenge I call the distance degradation problem. Even though light bounces perfectly inside the fiber, it still loses energy as it travels. The glass isn't perfectly clear, tiny imperfections in the glass absorb some photons. After about 50 miles, the light signal gets too weak to read. So how do you send data 5,000 miles across an ocean when your signal dies after 50? Engineers solved this with something brilliant. They put amplifiers called repeaters every 40 to 60 miles along the cable. These repeaters sit on the ocean floor in the pitch darkness, powered by electricity running through the cable itself. When the weakened light signal arrives, the repeater boosts it back to full strength. Then, the light continues its journey, bouncing down the fiber for another 50 miles until it hits the next repeater. It's like a relay race where the baton gets a fresh runner every few miles. Think about what this means practically. A cable from New York to London is about 3,000 miles long. That means there are roughly 60 repeaters sitting on the ocean floor between those two cities. Each one is about the size of a mini fridge. Each one has to work perfectly for decades with no maintenance because they're under miles of ocean. If even one fails, that section of cable loses capacity. This is engineering at a scale that's hard to even comprehend. And here's what makes this even more surprising. These cables aren't just sitting loose on the ocean floor. Near coastlines where fishing boats operate or ships might drag anchors, the cables are buried under the seafloor using special plows. But in the deep ocean, they just rest on the bottom. Engineers map the ocean floor, avoid underwater mountains and trenches, and lay the cable as flat as possible. Sometimes sharks bite the cables. Earthquakes shift them. Ship anchors snag them. But somehow, the system keeps working. Your brain struggles with this because you can't see it. Back when we used copper telephone wires, you could understand the system. Electricity flows through metal wire, makes a connection, you talk. Simple. But light traveling through glass for thousands of miles while bouncing off invisible walls created by physics, your brain has no reference point for that. It sounds like science fiction. So you default to thinking the internet is wireless because that's easier to imagine than the actual reality of glass cables at the bottom of the ocean. But wait till you hear this. Here's another layer that blows the whole thing wide open. A single fiber optic cable doesn't carry just one beam of light. It carries dozens of different colors of light simultaneously. Each color, each wavelength, carries a completely separate stream of data. This is called wavelength division multiplexing. Red light might be carrying Netflix data, blue light carries Zoom calls, green light handles email, all traveling down the same hair-thin fiber at the same time without interfering with each other. Think about this like radio stations. Your car can pick up dozens of radio stations broadcasting at different frequencies through the same air. The signals don't interfere because they're on different frequencies. Fiber optic cables work the same way but with light instead of radio waves. Different wavelengths of light are like different radio stations, all sharing the same physical fiber. This is how one cable can carry hundreds of terabits per second. It's not just one signal, it's dozens of signals packed together, separated by color. This matters because it explains why fiber optic cables completely transformed the internet. Before fiber, we used copper cables that carried electrical signals. Copper cables could maybe carry a few phone calls at once. Fiber cables can carry millions of simultaneous connections. The jump in capacity is so massive that once fiber got deployed, the entire internet exploded. Streaming video became possible. Cloud computing became practical. Video calls became normal. All because we figured out how to send multiple colors of light through glass threads underwater. Let me blow your mind for a second. Here's the uncomfortable truth about our digital world. Everything feels instant and magical because we've hidden the infrastructure. You tap your phone and information appears. You have no idea that your tap triggered light pulses that traveled through cables, under streets, across continents, under oceans, bouncing perfectly through glass millions of times, amplified by repeaters in the darkness, split into dozens of wavelengths, and then reassembled into the image on your screen, all in a fraction of a second. What's actually happening is that we've built one of the most complex machines in human history and then made it completely invisible. The internet feels like magic because you never see the hundreds of cables, the thousands of repeaters, the millions of miles of glass fiber. You just see the result. But behind every Instagram photo from Paris, every Spotify song from Sweden, every email from England, there's this vast physical infrastructure making it possible. Glass and light and physics doing something that seems impossible. This is why when a cable gets cut, and they get cut more often than you'd think, entire countries can lose internet access. In 2008, 2 cables in the Mediterranean got damaged, and suddenly Egypt, India, and Pakistan lost most of their international connectivity. Millions of people couldn't connect. Businesses shut down. It revealed just how dependent we are on these cables and how fragile the system actually is. The wireless, cloud-like internet we imagine is actually completely dependent on glass threads lying exposed on the sea floor. And it's the reason why countries treat these cables as critical infrastructure. You control the cables, you control the flow of information. China has been investing heavily in laying cables connecting Asia to Africa and Europe, bypassing Western infrastructure. The US watches Russian submarines suspiciously because they could theoretically tap or cut undersea cables. These aren't just data pipes, they're geopolitical assets. The digital world runs on them. Let me tell you about 2 engineers who both needed to connect data centers across the Pacific Ocean. We'll call them Sarah and Marcus. Sarah's working for a company in 2010. She's using older cable technology. Her cable can carry maybe 60 terabits per second total across the ocean. That sounds like a lot, but with millions of users streaming and downloading, it's constantly maxed out. During peak hours, connections slow down. Video quality drops. The cable is a bottleneck. Sarah knows the cable is the limiting factor, but she thinks the solution is to lay more cables, more physical infrastructure, more undersea construction projects. That's expensive and slow. It takes years to plan and deploy a new cable, so Sarah's company struggles with capacity limits while they wait for new cables to get approved and installed. Meanwhile, users complain about slow international speeds, buffering videos, dropped calls. Now compare that to Marcus. Marcus is working for a company in 2024. He's using the latest fiber optic technology with advanced wavelength multiplexing. His cable can carry over 400 terabits per second through the same physical infrastructure. How? By packing way more wavelengths of light into the fiber and using more efficient encoding. Marcus didn't need to lay new cables. He upgraded the equipment at both ends of existing cables. Notice how Marcus solved the capacity problem not by building more infrastructure, but by using the existing infrastructure more cleverly. That's because he understood that fiber optic cables aren't just about the glass. They're about how efficiently you can pack information into light. Sarah was thinking about cables as fixed capacity. Marcus understood them as platforms for ever-improving technology. And that mental shift made all the difference. Here's what most people don't realize. So what's really going on here? It's not actually about fiber optic cables being better than copper cables. It's about understanding that the speed of your internet isn't limited by wireless signals flying through the air. It's limited by physical cables that need to be maintained, protected, and upgraded. The people who succeed at building internet infrastructure don't have some special technical secret. They understand that the internet is physical and that physics, not marketing hype about wireless technology, determines what's possible. These patterns aren't about understanding complex engineering. They're about seeing that the most advanced technology often works by using fundamental physics in clever ways. Fiber optic cables seem futuristic, but they're just using a simple property of light total internal reflection that you can see in a swimming pool. The innovation wasn't discovering new physics. It was realizing how to apply physics we already understood to solve a massive communication problem. So here's what we've uncovered. Light bounces inside fiber optic cables because of total internal reflection, a natural property of how light behaves between materials of different speeds. Those hair-thin fibers carry multiple wavelengths of light simultaneously, each wavelength carrying separate data streams. Repeaters boost the signal every 50 miles so data can cross entire oceans. And the entire global internet depends on hundreds of these cables lying on the seafloor right now, carrying trillions of bits of information as pulses of light bouncing through glass. The question isn't whether you'll use fiber optic technology. You already are, every single time you use the internet. The question is whether you'll recognize that the digital world isn't floating in some magical cloud. It's built on real physical infrastructure, doing things that sound impossible but are actually just physics working exactly as it should. Because now you know that behind every video call, there's light zigzagging through glass at the bottom of the ocean, trapped by the laws of physics, bouncing millions of times without escaping. You can't unknow it. So next time you're on a video call with someone across the ocean, think about the journey your face just took. Your camera captured your image, converted it to light pulses, sent those pulses through fiber across the country, under the ocean, bouncing perfectly through glass, amplified by repeaters in the darkness, split into wavelengths, recombined at the other end, and displayed on their screen, all in a fraction of a second. Because once you see that the internet is made of light and glass and clever physics, that video call stops feeling like boring technology and starts feeling like the absolute miracle it actually is.